Welcome to the DNA Advantage podcast, where you can learn facts about your DNA that can help you live a healthier, longer life, doing all the activities you dream of doing. If you want to gain more control over your health and the factors that influence it, you're in the right place. Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be running through some topics about weight management. Many of us struggle with weight at some point in our lives, whether it is trying to gain or lose weight. And many of my clients have said it is the most frustrating situation that they ever encounter because it just seems so fruitless. It feels like they're constantly up against a battle. So what I wanted to run through today is just what we can do to help ourselves set realistic goals, but also understand our bodies in order to achieve what we are really going for. I would say that partly the reason that everyone is getting so upset about their weight at one point or another in their lives is because we have a certain expectation of our appearance. And there's a certain judgment around weight, which is one of the things that is completely separate from what I do, but definitely with people who are struggling with identity and with the effects of our weight on our looks, we need to address that as well separately. But weight also affects our health in multiple ways. We want to make sure that we are aware of how our bodies are processing certain things and dealing with our current weight and understanding if it is an ideal weight for us. And it's very individualized, just like anything else. When weight is high or low, it can limit our strength, our endurance, and our resilience. And just being over or underweight and feeling like we don't have full range of motion or the ability to sustain a particular exercise or activity is just really limiting and frustrating. Hopefully, understanding what the reasons are for weight gain or weight loss can make a big difference for you and ultimately give you control over something that has been really frustrating or difficult to get your arms around in the past. Knowing key facts about your genes can give you a really big advantage because ultimately you're understanding what your body needs to achieve the goal that you're setting. The first thing I would say is understanding how you metabolize certain nutrients like protein and carbs. People constantly going through the diet routine. It's never satisfying. You might have momentary satisfaction where you lose a few pounds and then you plateau and you're not moving any further. Understanding what the reasons are for that, understanding why our bodies aren't processing certain nutrients efficiently. Looking at our DNA, we can understand if there is a need for more protein or less, or if we want to restrict carbs at a certain time of day. It's a matter of understanding the efficiencies of our body, and everyone is different. That's a really big part of nutrition and your metabolism. But also, when it comes to nutrition, we want to understand deficiencies because keep in mind, the brain is in charge, especially when there's any perceived trauma or imbalance. So if we have a deficiency, it may be because we're not eating a particular nutrient, but it could also be that we're eating properly for our bodies, but our bodies aren't absorbing certain nutrients. And the brain perceives that as an imbalance and will shut down certain functions. As an example, let's say that we are eating normally, and from our own perception, we're eating healthy. And yet our bodies aren't taking in and absorbing the nutrients into our cells because of certain DNA SNPs. If that's the case, the brain may perceive that we are not eating properly or there's a famine. And in that case, then we will not release weight. So we may have extra storage, extra fat that we want to get rid of, but the brain is going to put a halt to that because it's going to perceive that we are in a famine because we're not getting the right nutrients. So that's one thing. The other is in gaining weight. It's really similar. And I know this probably isn't the majority of people who are looking at weight management, but I do have clients who want to gain weight or gain muscle and mass and haven't been able to. And you have to look at, again, how the body is absorbing certain nutrients, what it is that the body needs most, and be able to provide it so that you can overcome the inability to absorb. It might even be eating certain food combinations or getting a cofactor into the system to help support the absorption of a nutrient so that then the brain realizes better balance, we can move forward and gain weight or lose weight. So another thing we want to understand related to our genes is fat metabolism. The storage and distribution of fat is based on our genes. So we want to be aware of what we're set up for and what we can do to support the processing of fat. When it comes to fat, it is important for us to make the best choices for our foods, but also making sure that we keep things balanced in terms of omega-3 and omega-6. We want to make sure that we have omega-9 in the system. We want to make sure that we understand what our exercise routine is, and if we are promoting the release of fat, that we're doing it properly. When we understand these things, we're able to make the best choices for our weight goals. That's the pinnacle of what we're looking for here. In all of these discussions, it's always about understanding and learning about our bodies enough that we can personalize our approach. Our appetite and our hunger hormones are another area of information that we can gain from our DNA. They're a big influence on weight. Obviously, if we have cravings late at night, if we have cravings of any particular sort, that can make it very difficult to lose weight if we're trying to restrict certain foods or have a restricted diet in general. Understanding how leptin and ghrelin come into play, again, how our DNA is set up or setting us up, as we may feel, because sometimes that can feel like a massive setup if we're constantly hungry. And then, again, we're looking back to the metabolism of certain nutrients because there are certain foods that are going to be more satisfying for certain people than others. And that's something we need to learn about ourselves. We can learn a lot about our response to exercise and recovery, which can help us understand how to work out. It can help us understand what amount of time we need to have in between workouts and how to build muscle most appropriately. We want to exercise for our goals and not just overexert ourselves, which I'll be talking about here in a little bit. Knowing the status of our genes related to diabetes, heart disease, and high blood pressure is also very helpful because we can go into more of a preventative mode if we know that there is a situation that our genes set us up for. We don't want to just allow for it to happen and just assume that it's setting us up. We can actually do something about it to prevent it. And certainly weight is a factor when it comes to that. It's a vicious circle. If we allow for our weight to reach a certain level beyond what our bodies can handle, then that's when things like type 2 diabetes or heart disease can really take hold, and high blood pressure can really soar. We don't want to allow that to become a cycle because when we have those issues, it's harder to lose the weight. It's a vicious cycle. So understanding, again, the underpinnings of the weight and the origin of the problem, then we can really zoom in and do what's best for the body. Ultimately, understanding our bodies better can give us greater control. It's true of all of the topics that I've covered in the last few weeks. We really want to understand what it is that we need personally and be able to provide our bodies with what we need, and we'll see progress. Understanding our goals, understanding our DNA, and how our bodies respond to things, it's just really helpful. So let's review some of the opportunities. We can learn what to eat for our needs and our weight goals. We can leverage the foods that are filling to us and satisfying, and not necessarily go to the foods that are just top of the list for a particular diet. We need to personalize it for ourselves. We don't want to overload the body with what we can't handle. If we have too many toxins in our system, it can block nutrients as well. So it's almost like a false deficiency, because it's a deficiency that our DNA is not setting us up for. But if we can't detoxify something and we're taking it in too much, we need to identify the source of the toxins and reduce that source, but also help aid the body in reducing the overload that we've developed. I've talked to a lot of clients about how where they work might give them an overload of toxins. If they work around chemicals or they work around smoke. Some people can handle the smoke from, let's say, a smoker, meaning like when you're smoking meats and things like that. My daughter actually worked somewhere for a while where there was a smoker, and we don't handle that very well. The carcinogens from smoking meat can be really damaging, more so for some than others. And just understanding that, you need to limit your intake of that actual smoked meat. But the smoke itself is something you want to avoid. And if you are exposed to it, you need to detoxify properly. When we are exposed to certain toxins, what can happen is our bodies don't know what to do with it. The goal of the body is to keep toxins away from the organs, because it can be very damaging to the organs. So it will sequester some of the toxins into fat cells. And when the fat cells are all used up for storage, the body will make more. And we don't want excess fat, of course, because then that can lead to some of the diseases I've mentioned, or at least contribute to them. Another opportunity would be inflammation. When we identify what our inflammation level is, and if we have pro-inflammatory is stronger than the anti-inflammatory genes, then we need to make sure that we address that and give support to the body, because inflammation can cause pain, and it can cause lack of mobility and a tiredness that can surface in many different ways, but it can limit our level of activity and our ability to do what we need most, which is exercise and move the body consistently. And that makes losing weight harder. So it's important to understand your genes, to know what we can do to contribute in a positive way to the process of anti-inflammation. Another would be how well we're dealing with stress. When it comes to oxidative stress, there are the external stressors that we deal with, and then we have the internal stressors. Really just identifying how well we deal with oxidative stress and appreciate that that is something that can imbalance the body, which can shut down weight loss or weight gain. Mostly weight loss, though, in that case, because when we think about trauma, the brain might have a perceived trauma because of stress, because we have an elevated stress level over a period of time. It becomes chronic. And then the body is in a position of not being able to release because it's really distracted. It's distracted with survival. And the focus is on maintaining a certain level of life support, we'll call it. And instead of optimizing and rebalancing, the body is just focused on maintaining. So letting go of weight is not a priority. In fact, it could also go back to what I said before about maybe feeling like we're in more of a starvation mode and we need to hold on to the weight for that reason. We want to make sure that trauma or perceived trauma, whether we've had a baby recently and the body is not releasing weight because there's that feeling of possible trauma and could it happen again, and the brain is not in a position of allowing a release, or it could be things that are going on in the world that we feel like something could happen to us. That can definitely put us in an imbalanced state from a stressful point of view, and then we don't lose the weight. Again, our DNA can set us up for that because we have oxidative stress support within our DNA. If those enzymes are not being produced properly and our systems aren't working well, then we need to help balance it and give it the specific support that it needs. A couple more things. There's the microbiome, which we want to make sure we haven't imbalanced. So looking at whether it's a sudden onset of weight gain or if it's something that suddenly we just can't lose, like we've always been able to lose weight easily and now suddenly we can't lose it. Looking at your microbiome could be helpful. Understanding what contributes to undermining your microbiome in your digestive tract, understanding if you've had exposure to chemicals, if you have taken medications recently, if there's anything that you have changed in your diet. Even artificial sweeteners and artificial things can start to diminish the microbiome. If we've always had trouble, the microbiome is reliant on specific genes to stay balanced. Like FUT2 is one gene that we want to know about, because if we do have that, we want to support it in a very specific way. When it comes to hormones, it's a given. Anyone who's had a baby or anyone who's over the age of 35 can appreciate that men and women both go through hormonal changes. And it is difficult to gauge if you don't understand your body, if you don't understand your DNA, and you don't understand how things are working collectively. When you think about your hormones, even cortisol hormone, we want to know how we are contributing to it and how we're supporting the ebbs and flows of hormones. And we want to be able to give that everything we have. We'll just use estrogen as an example because it's a big one. Estrogen is really important for men and women because, unfortunately, in our environment, we are exposed to xenoestrogens, and the latest news of microplastics makes it feel like it's impossible to avoid, but we can help support the body in releasing things like that. But microplastics, plastics in general, plastic bottles, drinking out of water bottles, just xenoestrogens coming from the plastic containers that we use to store our foods, all of those things we would want to limit if we know that we have an estrogen overage. More weight in our bellies, in our hips, that's a sign, but also that could be cortisol. Cortisol is another very important area to look because we have a lot of influence over cortisol. Being able to exercise is great, but we don't want to over-exercise because we can really crank up that cortisol and have it as like a chronically elevated status. Also, when we go to sleep is a big factor. If we don't sleep between the hours of 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., that can compromise our ability to reset our cortisol levels. Those are the only times that we are able to do that. So we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves ample time to sleep, but also the appropriate time to sleep. And we're influencing our cortisol and our adrenaline when we drink coffee, when we do different activities, and we want to see a lift and a lull. So we want to be able to see that undulate throughout the day, where we're in fight or flight and we're amping up for activity, and then we're going down into the rest and digest phase And throughout the day, it is constantly cycling. What can happen with cortisol being high is we can get really elevated and it's sending the wrong signal to the brain. So then we are in fight or flight all the time, which we all know can cause serious problems. Really understanding your body and your brain, listening to your body, listening to the response that we have. When we start to make changes, we need to listen and maybe make one change at a time to really understand what's working and what's not, and what is serving us. When it comes to weight, if you're not doing DNA testing, we do have some things that we can do without knowing our DNA. We just are guessing. So I would say listen to your body, start tracking what you're eating, what might have changed if you had a sudden onset of weight gain or weight loss. When we're not well, or if we are in a position of imbalance, we can lose weight and not be able to gain. And it's important for us to recognize that as well. Listening to the body, pay attention to the cues, and then ultimately, I would love for everyone to do DNA testing so you have the knowledge that's going to take you where you want to go. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks so much for joining me to learn about DNA health. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you'd like to join my free community where we delve into more details about DNA, just click Community below.